Hi folks, I hope things are well with you. So in this video, I basically want to get back to talking about the current state and of politics in Ireland and how people are viewing a lot of the parties and how their voting patterns might be affected as a result of the coronavirus. So and what we can expect in terms of maybe the lockdowns and how long they'll last and how long things will be implemented. So with that, let's get into it. So the first thing I want to talk about or break down is I believe that the lockdowns are going to be, for them to be lifted, I think are going to be a lot slower than, and this is going to take a lot longer than people might want or people might expect. And I think there's about three different reasons for this. So the first reason is simply put that this is being done by government workers, right? All these decisions are being done by government workers, by public sector lads, by civil servants, all that kind of thing. And one of the things you need to look at, or I think we need to look at, is the personality type of people who end up within the public sector and within the civil service. So, for one thing, is the people who self select into the public sector tend to be people who are very very low in terms of risk, and who tend to be not the most kind of if you were to say look at the kind of big five personality test, these would be people who would be low in terms of openness to experience. They want to be kind of have their steady job, do their stuff, be told what to do, and go home. And the other component with that is obviously the private sector and a lot of people's jobs. And I think we're up to about 600,000 people claiming the so-called kind of COVID, or the Wu flu super dole, or whatever what you want to call it, right? But because of that low risk part of a lot of people within the government's personality, and because of the fact that they simply haven't experienced any public sector pay cuts, and because the economy can kind of fall down around them, and because it just simply doesn't, they're in a bit of a different world in that kind of way, they're going to be they're going to be more reluctant, or they're going to be less interested in reducing the lockdowns as quickly as possible. So that's something to keep in mind. And finally, the other thing too is because of the fact that so many more people don't have a job now, government sector government workers have a higher level of status within the society. And because of the fact that they're the ones left standing, they have the solid job, they have the pension, all that kind of thing. So when you combine all that, you've got a group and a structure and an organization of people who are just going to be simply less interested in terms of leaving the lockdown, which is kind of interesting, because one of the things I'm kind of seeing a little bit is increasingly it seems to be kind of even like, talking about immigration, in that like a lot of people will be kind of, they'll agree with you, or they'll come at this more from a kind of a nationalist point of view. But because it's not the most socially acceptable thing to talk about, then they're not exactly going to bring it up. But there is a bit of a kind of like, stuff like, oh, this is some gay virus and I just want to get back to work. That's kind of been creeping in a little bit. There's increasingly more and more people are kind of more ambivalent, have a kind of a more in the grey kind of feeling about the whole thing. And even it's becoming more and more acceptable. I mean, to say that like you're flat out against lockdown. I mean, I remember just someone I know, his a relative of his sent him a kind of a message, even talking about Gemma O'Doherty. No, I mean, Gemma O'Doherty is still kind of seen as a laughing case or a laughing stock, but that person said something along the lines of like, even though I despise Gemma O'Doherty, she has a point with the lockdown. So there's a little bit of that kind of creeping in a bit more. So I thought that was interesting. And in addition to those, there's two other points. So in my video talking about the broken heart, I was talking about the fact that there's a thing in kind of the Irish personality or the Irish psyche, whatever you want to call it, that the Irish love being told what to do. They look for a big other. They look for this kind of EU kind of telling them what to do, big system telling them what to do. They like being told that, like, oh, they're the best kind of lads in the class and all that kind of stuff. And so I think there's going to be a kind of a thing with, the Irish government or with a lot of these kind of higher up lads to kind of go like, look how much we care, look how much we're willing to sacrifice to keep our kind of thing going and how safe we are, and to get a kind of a pat on the head from the World Health Organization or the European Union. So because of that kind of attitude that's within a lot of Irish people, this is going to go on longer than it might in other European countries, if I was to guess. And then finally, and I'll link this down below, and it's kind of an interesting question or an interesting topic. And I was just kind of thinking about this for a bit. Like, I think one of the things that's happened, and it kind of affects the severity of the lockdown. Like I was kind of thinking, why is it that a society that seems to almost like not treat its elderly people well, or not have the kind of most respect for them? I mean, you can even see this how we dealt with the whole nursing home thing. Why is it that a society like that is so willing to pull the plug on your whole economy, your whole system? And it's maybe not necessarily for those elderly people. And the answer to that, I think, is because of the fact that we're living in an era of prosperity, increased peace. People are kind of softer than ever before, and because we live in a kind of a post-Christian, post-religious society or state, then people are more and more kind of terrified of, death, basically, and they don't have that kind of spiritual backing. So, I mean, like I said, I linked it down below, a website called Quintus Curtius, and he did a good post on attitudes of people towards kind of previous, plagues and breakouts and pandemics. And he was kind of discussing about the fact that, like, the attitude in those stages was like, have a kind of a quarantine and quarantine the sick, but to make sure that kind of life goes on as much as possible, and to not basically shut down or have the attitude that we have right now. Now, I mean, there's maybe a little bit of a flaw there in that, like, shutting down the economy in the early 20th century is a very different thing from shutting down the economy in the early 21st century, of course. But I kind of wonder, like, it's just kind of maybe an interesting kind of thought experiment. If you were to put your average person living like the early 20th century, or when the yellow fever broke out in the 1700s, or you had a cholera breakout in the United States in like the 1890s. If you put that average person into 21st century lockdown coronavirus 2020, would he act the same way? Would his attitude be a lot different, or a lot more kind of laid back to this? And I think that's it's kind of a fascinating thing. So basically, based on those points, things getting kind of back to where they were are going to be, on the slow side, or slower than you think, because of, so increased fear of death, love being told what to do by the EU, and public sector people being in general very, very risk averse, and more separated from what's going on kind of with the day-to-day economy, while people who own businesses are increasingly talking about, like, look, we just want to get the fuck fuck back to this as well. So those are the kind of reasons I wanted to talk about there. And the influence on the political climate or voting patterns going forward. Well, there's a very interesting Red C poll that came out, and the results of it were fascinating to me, because what you had was Fianna Fáil collapsing to 14% and Fine Gael shooting up to 35% of the vote. But here's the interesting thing. If you take a look at Sinn Féin, or if you take a look at the results from a lot of the kind of left-wing parties, or the more left-wing parties, or whatever you want to call it, their percentage of the vote stayed the same, right? Their percentage of the vote stayed the same, even though there's been a kind of a general kind of feel that, like, this has been handled well, even though it hasn't at all. It hasn't at all. And I find that interesting, because a kind of a main traditional kind of thing within Irish politics is that you've seen this kind of like tennis ball effect. So, you vote Fianna Fáil into power, and then things go badly, and then the vote shifts from Fianna Fáil to Fine Gael, and then back and forth and back and forth. But like was shown in 2020, and like what you can see with that Red C poll, that effect seems to be declining more and more and more. And there's also another couple of interesting things that are going to make that accelerate in the next while. So the first thing that's going to make that accelerate is, simply put, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, those voters tend to be older, and they're going to die off, simply put. And because older people vote in larger numbers than younger people, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael's support is going to decline the next while. So that's kind of one interesting thing. And the other interesting thing too is, with that kind of older support, or with that older kind of cohort, the people that tend to vote Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, those are the people that, that swing forward to Fine Gael suggests that, like, those are the people who are kind of more susceptible to, he's playing a blinder and all that kind of stuff. And like I said before, those are kind of older people. Those are kind of baby boomer generation kind of people. And the interesting thing, like I said, it kind of goes back to my kind of fear of death thing earlier. The kind of, there's a difference between the kind of 55 to 70-year-olds and the 70 to 85-year-olds. The 55 to 70-year-olds are kind of, the kind of people who say 60 is the new 20, like, that kind of stuff. And their attitude has been kind of more like, bring on the vaccine, we can't do anything, we have to be as rigid on this as possible. Whereas even I kind of see it around my area or my estate, people are kind of more and more kind of relaxed about this. People and teenagers and whatnot walking around in small groups, lads with deck chairs out drinking some cans, that kind of stuff. Like, and I think that's very important. Because the lockdown is going to be, so basically what's going to happen is you're going to have two opposing effects, right? And the opposing effects are going to be, you're going to have, like I was kind of saying before, like government workers, they're going to want to keep things kind of more and more locked down. And these kind of more well-off, kind of 55 to 70-year-old, they have their pensions and all that kind of stuff. And their jobs are maybe that bit more safe anyway. Kind of boomer people. And, the whole kind of increased fear of death for them. And on the other side, you're going to have more angry, frustrated younger people. Because the thing is, and this effect hasn't fully kicked in yet, the Irish economy is fucked. It's completely and utterly fucked beyond belief. and it's going to get more and more fucked. I mean, one of the things that's even kind of catching up, I mean, so for example, even in terms of value of our exports, right? 60% in terms of our exports, value wise, comes from pharmaceuticals. And then you have our media government establishment doing stuff like, Trump derangement syndrome, and then, whatever your opinions of him, Trump, are positive or negative, then you have Trump trying to talk about bringing back pharmaceuticals to America. And pharmaceuticals, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but they pay a significant amount, pharmaceutical companies, in terms of corporation tax, very significant amounts. And corporation taxes are 25%, roughly speaking, of our total tax receipts. So that could be gone. That could be gone. I mean, it's already projected that we're going to be down about, out of our total tax receipts of a typical last couple of years, about 14 a bit billion. We're already down 15 billion. And meanwhile, we're giving out these massive, massive, exorbitant, even by other European standards, COVID payments. 600,000 people are availing of these payments. So basically, this is one of the most interesting things which I think is coming down the line. The economy is absolutely destroyed. It's screwed. It's gonna, and the people that are gonna survive in it are, whether it's your IT guy or your boomer middle management guy or your government worker on the top. And then a lot of younger people are just going to be, they're just going to be kicked out, and they're just going to have a much, much harder prospect of getting a job. And like I was talking about in my video, the decline of globalism, probably not the best title for it in retrospect. I was talking about the fact that, like, increasingly there's been this anger building up among younger people for older people, against older people, because it's kind of seen as like, these older people, they grew up in a kind of a more stable time, or they had a better opportunity of things, whereas kind of my generation and younger, we grew up with kind of less economic prospects, more divorced parents, more single parents, all that kind of stuff. And that anger and that attitude towards kind of older people is building up more and more and more. And if your economy just is absolutely driven into the ground, I could definitely see this like exploding in a big way. And another thing as well is, traditionally when Ireland has had significant economic issues, it's been able to just, export all these people. It's incredible. We've had this massively corrupt kleptocracy for so fucking long. And the answer has been, oh, well, fuck off. You can fuck off to Australia, But this time, that release valve is gone, right? And so you're going to have this angry group of people with no economic prospects. And that's going to be more and more likely, even as, like, for the reasons I kind of listed above, because the lockdown is going to be very, very slow. And some of the things within the lockdown are just stupid out. Fucking the thing with the pubs, right? I remember watching RT61 a few days ago. I think, no, it was just 2 days ago. And they were talking about this fucking pub in Holt, like, trying to do social distancing. Like, this is the kind of thing that only a fucking public sector government admin worker can think of, like, lads, if you do this, like, you still wipe out the pub sector. Like, no one is going to want to drink there. Younger people are just going to go to, like, a fucking house party, or if, or worse, become increasingly atomized and, like, fucking drink in their room or whatever, like, that's this whole, and I'll get into even the words social distancing and whatnot in a bit, but this is all, my worry is that this frustration is just going to build up more and more and more, and when when the economic problems really start hitting, and when they get pushed onto younger people rather than government workers or boomers who are kind of out of the system, that's when things get nasty. That's when things get nastier. And what's that going to result in? Well, all Sinn Féin have to do is go, if you close the borders because of the virus, not talk about immigrants, because of the virus, and if you dealt with your nursing homes, and then in the meantime, younger people are going to be looking for, why did this all happen? Why did this all happen? And they will correctly, to some degree, or well, even mostly, go, oh, it's because we have a globalist, neoliberal, capitalist system. And they're going to look for kind of an alternative to that. And that's going to be the more kind of socialistic or socialist kind of system that Sinn Féin are talking about. So, if you are a member of any of these nationalist parties, this is where I feel increasingly, as of now, this is all going to come to a head. Now, it'll depend on how much money we can borrow, how much money we can get, and how much exactly we're able to rack up the debt, and how much of, like, you know, kind of an increase in taxes and all that kind of stuff are you going to see. And finally, as well, like, you know, I'm going to do another video of this, but there is a lot to be said, or there you know, there has been a big impact in terms of how people react to things because of video games, because of porn, because of Netflix. You know, that effect does numb people out. Like, it does kind of make people kind of baseline happy or baseline content in some shape or form. And another effect I kind of wanted to talk about there, I know this is a bit of a ramble, but I think there's a lot of just kind of interesting developments here that we need to keep an eye out on. And, you know, I think it's more important than, and along with the kind of free speech stuff I talked about in the media murder machine video, that we need to be paying attention to, is the impact of the media on what's going on. Now, I think one of the reasons why you've seen this big shift in Fine Gael support is because of the fact that, you know, the impact of the media. And one of the things I've kind of been a little bit concerned about, I suppose, is the fact that, like, there seems to be, you know, whenever I kind of watch this kind of 6-1 news stuff, there seems to be a kind of a weird sort of push-pull effect. And what I mean by that is, you know, they'll use words like, which have been taught up by some behavioral psychologists or marketing communications group, you know, like cocooning or social distancing. And when you break down these words, you know, cocooning is a very kind of warm sounding, you know, fucking caterpillar turns into a butterfly kind of shit, like, when in fact it's, you know, staying in your fucking house and not talking to anyone and getting depressed because you're lonely, if that's the case for you, you know. But I think there's kind of a sort of a weird, interesting effect whereby a lot of the new stuff seems to try and hit people with, like, oh, this is bad, or it's worse than it is, or you have these kind of idiot journalists kind of going on about like, oh, this is the new normal and we'll have to think about restructuring our whole society because of social distancing. And then they'll hit you with a kind of a good, warmy, fuzzy story, which is kind of like, here's Mary, who's 95 and who's walking 1 kilometre a day in her garden to raise money for, I don't know, fucking little Albanian boys. I don't know, you know? But it's this kind of emotional kind of contrast that you kind of jolt people, and then you use these kind of words to make them kind of feel good, and then they have a kind of a warm sort of mental association. Oh, there's, you know, he's playing a blinder, he's talking about cocooning, you know? And I think that's had a big effect in terms of, like, getting people more and more. And in addition to the kind of journalist bailouts that I was talking about, and that in the Media Murder Machine video. So that's also going on as well, and that's also another variable because it's going to depend on how long that lasts. Because, and like we've seen from the Red Sea uh, data, you know, a lot of the core people who voted Sinn Féin haven't budged. A lot of the people who voted like Green and the Social Democrats and whatever haven't budged at all in terms of the percentage. So this is only working on a certain section of people, but it's just going to be interesting to see how long exactly that's going to last. So anyway, there's a lot of variables to kind of keep in mind or take a look out for. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of ways this can all play out, but I think those are good kind of ideas and um, things to keep in mind. So, and what we have to kind of work towards and work forward with for the time being. I mean, personally, I think one of the things we really should be trying to press home as much as possible is the fact that it was kind of the last video I posted. It was the one of the New Zealand Prime Minister talking about, like, you know, how we did a good job and basically Ireland has had to open up a lot later. You know, it's interesting basically that New Zealand are using us as a kind of an example of how badly we did. And I put that up because it is kind of like, you know, lads, if you wanna, we really need to drive home that we did a terrible job at this. And we really do need to drive it home because, you know, I mean, another scenario that could arise is, you know, this kind of always playing a blinder stuff lasts for a very, very long time, even if the economy gets worse, you know. And excuse me, if you have that, then our ability to deal with that or fight back against that is going to be heavily reduced. But right now, it does seem to be more an effect, or things seem to be more going towards kind of Sinn Féin in the long run. I mean, we knew that before the election anyway, but you know, I wonder if this is going to speed up in the next while.